Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, sponsored by the California Fire Science Consortium and part of the UC Davis Forest and Fire Ecology Random Lecture Series, or FAREL. I'm Tara Ursel, and I'm the host for today's webinar. I'm a coordinator for the Sierra Nevada region of the CFSC, the California Fire Science Consortium, which is a fire science outreach organization. Our mission includes increasing communication between fire researchers, managers, policymakers, tribes, landowners, homeowners, and other stakeholders. The California Fire Science Consortium is part of the nationwide Fire Science Exchange Network funded through the Joint Fire Science Program. So first, a few housekeeping items. As you could tell from the beginning, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted within the next week on our website and YouTube channel, along with closed captions. If you're having any technical issues, please feel free to send me a private message, a private chat, and I can try to help you once we get started. We'll be using the chat function to ask and answer, or to ask questions, and then we'll address them all at the end. So please use the chat function so that we can collect questions for our speakers today. You can feel free to type a question at any time and we'll collate them for the end. So we have two speakers today, Dr. Sarah Hennessy and Dr. Megan Jennings, and we are going to aim to have this wrapped up within the hour. So thank you again for joining us. I do want to turn it over to Hugh Safford, who wanted to say a few words about this study. Hugh?
Hi, thanks, Tara. And also I wanted to ask you whether you're going to provide a link for people to do a survey of their experiences.
Yes, we will also be asking you to complete a survey, completely voluntary at the end. So we'll post that in the chat as well.
Okay, good. That's great. Always good things to have. So anyway, yeah, thanks. This is really nice to get this thing rolling again. COVID put a big hole in a lot of our lives, and we're really excited to start the FAREL lecture series again, hoping at some point to be able to do this in the near future live again at Davis with some streaming. We'll see whether we can pull that off soon. Anyway, thanks for being here. And I'm just really excited to see this presentation. This is a project that a number of us in Southern California, and then myself not in Southern California, have been involved in. We're very concerned about the ecological conditions and trends, demographic conditions and trends in air pollution and climate change and everything in Southern California, and the extreme threat that Southern California ecosystems are under. And so a few years ago, we worked with the USGS Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center to develop a proposal that they ultimately funded to begin a stakeholder-driven process to promulgate a strategy for how we might deal with some of these problems, including educating people what the problems are and thinking in concert with a lot of other people about how we actually go about solving these problems. So I'm really excited that Megan and Sarah were able to be available today, and they're going to explain this to you. So I'll turn it over to you two, and thanks for being here.
Well, thanks, Hugh. I will take it from here. So I'm going to start, and then Sarah's going to wrap us up. I'm Megan Jennings. I'm a research scientist at San Diego State University, one of the partners involved in this work. And I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm trying to move the slide forwards. I don't have control. Sarah, could you move the slide forward for me? So Southern California's forests are unique in a lot of ways, but not in some ways. So if you've done any work in any of California's forests, forest loss is a concern, in particular, tree mortality, stand replacing fire, and now we're piling the impacts of climate change that are becoming more and more apparent on top of these issues that we were already facing. And it's making these threats greater. We're more concerned about the loss of forests. And in Southern California, that's particularly poignant because we are at the leading edge of climate, being as far south as we are. We only have so much elevation gain that we can provide in terms of elevational shifts. And we have 21 million people who live in Southern California. So there's a lot of pressures going on that are putting our forests at risk. And we've seen a lot of forest loss. So Sarah, if you can go to the next slide. That leads us to the impetus for this project that was Hugh's brainchild, and he went to the Southwest Cask, and Carolyn Enquist, who's on the call today, really grabbed onto this and said, I agree that we really need this effort where really we want an all lands approach. This can't just be, even though the Forest Service is the majority landholder, we all need to be working together from multiple sectors, multiple land management agencies. And the first thing we need is common ground. Where are we starting from? What is the information that we have available to us, and how can we best work together to put together some strategies and actually make things happen on the ground, get all the way to implementation to make our forests more resilient to these threats that I'm talking about, the fire and climate change and drought and all the other things that come along with that, like pests and pathogens. So we put together a team, and Sarah, if you'll flip to the next slide, I'll introduce you to the team that represents all these organizations that are working together. So of course, we have a strong representation from the Forest Service. Sarah and her colleague Nicole Molinari are the ecologists for Southern California, based out of the Forest Service. We also have Jeff Hayes, who is the resource officer on the Cleveland National Forest. Of course, many of you probably know Hugh, who was with the Forest Service for many, many years, and that's why he was promoting this, but he has certainly not left us in the lurch, as he retired from the Forest Service and continues on at UC Davis and has taken up with Vibrant Planet, so he's certainly present. Carolyn Enquist had the vision to help provide the funding for this work from the Southwest Task and has been very actively involved in helping to move this forward. And then I was brought in collaboration with my colleagues at the Climate Science Alliance to help put together some outreach and engagement strategies. We've been doing a lot of this work in Southern California, more focused on our chaparral systems, but I spent a lot of my career working in these forests and doing work on the ground. So I was excited to have the opportunity to join with this group to work on these issues and sort of bring some of our networks and this outreach. And now I'm working on some of the science as well. And then we've got my two partners at the Climate Science Alliance, Amber Paris and Connor McGee, who are helping with the outreach and engagement strategy. And so if you go to the next slide, just to kind of put this into broader context, as I mentioned, this connects with some of the work that we were already doing in Southern California. That's the logo on the right-hand side, Connecting Wildlands and Communities, which was about climate adaptation for our built environment and natural environment and science and service of all of that. But, my group at San Diego State is not the only one advancing this type of science. Everyone involved in this project has been doing their own science. And I think some of the really cool things about this project is that we're bringing a lot of this together. Everything's integrated. Sarah's going to talk about a post-fire restoration work that the Forest Service was leading that is being integrated into this. So we're not reinventing the wheel. Rather, what we're doing is capitalizing on and leveraging all the good work that's been done thus far, making sure that it's specialized and focused on Southern California's unique needs, and then bringing more people to the table. And that's, you'll see the California Landscape Conservation Partnership logo down there. I am the interim coordinator of that group, and that's yet another opportunity for us to link some of this science to action and planning. Sarah, next slide. So back to the project, as I mentioned, we wanted to find common ground and really importantly, work on building a community of practice. Again, this is, an all land strategy, and it's not just about the land managers who do the work. It's about the different community members, people who live in these forests, people who, are advocates for conservation or forest protection or fire safety, making sure that those who carry out the work, contractors, are part of the conversation. I mean, this is a really big, it's an ecosystem ecologically, but it's also a social ecological system with all of these people playing really important roles. And then of course, we have all those people living in Southern California, many of whom who don't even know that we have these forests in our region. So, we have some unique challenges, but I feel really hopeful. And I think this is where Hugh's vision was coming from, that if we're all working together and having this same frame of reference, that we can be really effective in what we're doing. And that's why we're trying to work to build this climate informed strategy. So again, we want to take it from, the baseline science that informs everything we do, that then, we can use to develop a strategy. Then we get to specific implementation actions, not prescriptive, but recommendations and guidance and direction. And then really importantly, promote that collaboration, because we're going to be able to get a whole lot more done together than we can individually. And we've tried the individual way and we haven't been making a lot of progress. So I think people are very ready for this step. Next slide, Sarah. So where are we talking about? This project is focused on the high elevation forests. They're essentially sky islands, just like in Arizona. You can see from this map, the dark green is coniferous forest and the light green is hardwood forest. This is all forest over 1,200 meters or 3,600 feet. And you can see that it's patchy, it's not contiguous. There's larger patches and a lot of smaller patches. That's part of what makes this really hard to manage. It's part of what puts our forests at greater risk. And connectivity is critically important, but this is what we're dealing with. And then of course, the gray that you see modeled in there, especially the great big splash of gray in the middle, that's urbanization. That is the LA basin and the Inland Empire and the San Diego and Santa Barbara major metropolitan areas. So we have a lot to contend with, but I think we have a strategy that's going to help us make some good work. So next slide, Sarah. And what we hope to do with this conservation strategy, a couple of times, I've mentioned this all lands approach. This is really making sure everyone, regardless of how small your plot of land, even if it's the smallest private landowner, is involved and has a say and, is able to provide feedback. And then connecting that, we'll talk more today about the science that we're using to provide the guidance on threats, desired conditions, potential management actions, and adaptation strategies, and making sure that the practitioner perspectives, in particular on overcoming barriers to implementation. We can have all the greatest science in the world, but that doesn't mean we'll be able to get things done because there's a lot of regulatory challenges and just bureaucratic challenges to getting the work done. So with all those things in mind, we're working to develop some goals and strategies that will help us mitigate threats, vulnerabilities. I'm going to talk a little bit about a framework we're using to do that, and then also figuring out ways to overcome those barriers to action. And in particular, we're hoping that partnerships is a way through some of those barriers, in particular, establishing joint projects, which really excitingly is already happening. And I think gives us a place to sort of have a proving ground and test some of these things out. And we're really focused on partner and stakeholder engagement throughout this entire process, from project inception all the way through to sort of once the strategy is developed, we're not stopping. We're going to help facilitate action and getting these partnerships off the ground. Next slide, Sarah. So what's going to come forward in the conservation strategy is recommendations from adaptation science. It's going to inform our regional prioritization planning, and again, sort of focus on the strategic implementation, not just piecemeal or do what you can or what's readily available, but being really strategic. And the cool thing is, click again, Sarah, that this connects to some broader efforts. So there's been a number of calls to action. The federal government is trying to move on this. The state has been very active. I'm sure you all know about a lot of this. And importantly, that also links to funding. And what we need to do is get to the place where we have plans in place. We've been through regulatory process. We can actually leverage these plans and funding programs to get the work done. And so I'm not going to read all of these, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with them, but we're definitely trying to get into this movement and these calls to action and funding programs so that we are well situated to begin to get this work done at an increasing pace and scale. Next slide, Sarah. So to begin to get information about, where are people in terms of getting work done and what their biggest challenges are, we put out a practitioner survey. So folks who are actively involved in forest management from a lot of different perspectives and agencies and backgrounds, we wanted their input. And it's helping to guide the development of the strategy. So this first graph you'll see, we were asking people about what information did they need to help with project prioritization and design support. What kind of pieces of information did they need to support them? And you'll see some basics about kind of the condition of the forest, stand density or fire history. But we were also sort of asking, do you have a good sense of a frame of reference for how climate is affecting what you're dealing with and how to sort of look forward, not just the immediate problem in front of us, but the problems that are coming down the line. And that's where you see sort of areas of greatest vulnerability to multiple threats, high exposure to climate impacts, fire return interval departure or fire risk. So we wanted to take these pieces of information, the things that people were telling us that they needed, and work it into a framework to help with that prioritization and design support. So next slide, Sarah. And that takes us to this framework that we've been working on. So we're calling it a refugial framework, actually, because we're sort of using the idea of refugial capacity to help inform how we develop this. So we're using this as a framework for management decisions. The goal is to get to a place where we can help advise, if you're looking at the entire landscape, where should we be doing things? What should we be doing? And how do we prioritize all of that, with the goal of retaining and building resilience in Southern California's forests. So really keeping forest as forest is an important goal. And we're thinking about it from two perspectives, both sort of ecological resilience, but also thinking about fire safety, life and property. Those are really critical concerns for the people who live in these areas. So the first step in the process is to evaluate refugial capacity. I'm going to show you some steps that we've been working along that process, but this is based on some work that I did in a prior project that one of my postdocs, Isa Rojas, led and published about integrating the concept of refuge, integrating multiple stressors to consider refugia from multiple domains, if you will. So thinking about, what kind of stressors do we have in hydrologic systems and from a fire perspective, and specifically from a climatic perspective or the human perspective, because our landscapes face all of these at the same time. They're not operating in isolation. So let's look at them all together and consider where the landscape may be more or less buffered from these potential stressors. Then we can look at priority areas. Where do we have unique biodiversity, rare species, maybe areas of management priority, something like a high value recreation area where people come to see something important. This can be, manager defined. Certainly it may vary by landowner or manager or whomever it is you're talking to, but we think that, these priority areas, for example, places that provide ecosystem services, can be really helpful in guiding where do we put our energy and effort. And then finally, thinking about vulnerabilities helps us figure out where we have an opportunity to take action to make change. So when we talk about refugial capacity, we're using that in the sense of those are inherent characteristics of the landscape that we cannot change. It's things like topography. How does topography affect fire risk, for example, or urbanization? It is where it is, and we can't sort of undo some of those things. So those are sort of the static features of the landscape. They may grow, but they are where they are, and we can't undo those. The vulnerabilities, things like perhaps stand density, we do have an opportunity to make those changes. So that's how we're sort of giving ourselves a pathway into decision making, that those vulnerabilities are really the places where we're going to try and take management action to reduce the vulnerability and increase the chance of persistence. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, the key part of this is that we're hoping that this will help direct us into response strategies in terms of big picture. What direction do you want to go with management? Now, you may be familiar with the RAD framework, resist, accept, direct. I prefer a little bit different language: resist, accommodate, and transform. And just being pragmatic, we also need to have no action on the list. We can't protect everything out there. So we do have to, I think, make some hard decisions about where are areas that we might be okay letting go if we can't protect it all and can't keep it all as forest. So being sort of strategic in that sense, but resisting the changes, places that perhaps are more buffered, or for example, a place that's less buffered and we're expecting is going to experience a lot of change. Maybe we can look to transforming that to something completely different that will still be able to have an opportunity to be resilient and persist as forest. It's just that what that forest is might look different. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, the multi-stressor refugia framework that I talked about, the way that we looked at it is you're sort of layering on how resistant you are to these different stressors. And so, for example, if you weren't resistant at all to any of them, you'd be down at the bottom there at no refugial capacity at all. Maybe you're resistant to just one, to say climatic change. That would be the single refugia. But what we're really looking for in terms of places where maybe we could resist change and not have to do a whole lot of activity are super refugia. That's what we're calling the ones where you might have high refugial capacity to all or many of the stressors that you face in the landscape. So that's kind of the baseline that we've been working with. And Sarah, if you go to the next slide, this is the area of analysis that we've been working on. So that the whole framework that I told you about, the second two pieces are in the works, but we do have some draft results from the refugial analysis. So that's what I'm going to show you. This is our analysis area. So this is no longer masked by elevation. So you can see all of the areas of forest, low and high elevation in the dark and light green, the coniferous and hardwood forest again. And then that dark outline is the area where we're doing the analysis. We wanted something contiguous. So people ask, is chaparral included in that? Yes, it is within that extent, although we weren't looking at anything that was specific to conserving chaparral. So I'm just going to walk through some of the initial results from the refugial analysis, and I'll show you how we're putting these pieces together. So if you go to the next slide, Sarah, I'm going to start with the human pressure domain. So the reason I'm starting with this one is actually the most simplistic in the way that we treated it, and you'll see how we add complexity on as we move through some of those other domains. But this one, we have, as I mentioned a couple of times, we have a whole lot of people in Southern California. Impervious surface is a way to represent that impact of development. And because the impacts of development don't just end at that hard edge, what we did was used a smoothing process to look at the percent of impervious surface averaged over an 800 meter neighborhood. So you sort of get that impact of edge effects. And so what you see here is impervious surface rescaled to a scale of 0 to 1. So anything that's 1 has the highest refugial capacity, and anything with a 0 has the lowest refugial capacity. So you see that ring sort of in the center, that's around the LA basin, that has the least refugial capacity to human pressure because that's where human pressure is the greatest. So if you go to the next one, Sarah, this is where we start to add complexity. So wildfire, again, remember, this is about things that we cannot change in the landscape. So we had multiple factors that play into fire risk in the fire domain. So we looked at topographic position. Are you on the flats? Are you on a steep slope, on a ridgeline? Southwestness, thinking about aridity and fuels and availability of those fuels to burn. So the more southwest something was, the greater chance of fires, so the lower refugial capacity. And then finally, Santa Ana winds are really important for our fires in Southern California. So any place where we had history of Santa Ana winds had lower refugial capacity. And what we did was took each one of these metrics, rescale each one, combine them, and then rescale again. So similarly, low refugial capacity is a 0 in the red color. High refugial capacity is anything that's a 1 in that deep green color. So that was the wildfire domain. And then finally, we'll move to the climate domain. This one adds one more step of complexity because we can look at past climate, but it's also important to think about what future climate is going to be. So again, with a goal of forest maintaining as forests, we wanted to think about climatic water deficit. That drought indicator or moisture indicator seems to be really important for a lot of these species. So what we did was use 2 measures of climatic water deficit, a change in mean in the accumulated climatic water deficit, and then a frequency of prolonged drought. So that's just the 90th percentile of events. And this was all Bayesian characterization model downscaled data. And we looked at the recent past, and we weighted that a little more heavily because we know that to be true. And then we looked at 2 near futures. We don't know which one is real or if either are real. So those got equal weight. The 2 combined had equal weight to the past. So we used a hotter model, the HADGAM-ES, and then a drier model, the MIROC-5, both with the emissions pathway at 8.5. So sort of a severe, but mostly what we're on track for scenario. And again, you can see here, anything with a 0 is that low refugial capacity to change in climatic water deficit, and 1 is high. So you can see where we have areas that are looking like they're going to be really dry, or they have been really dry, in areas where we're concerned for forest persistence. So next slide. So we combine all of those. We're rescaling each one as we go, and then what we can do is add them at the end. So when you add climate and wildfire and human pressures, you have this combined capacity with a max value of 3. And you can see the max value here, we have some dark greens that seem to have high refugial capacity across all of those stressors. So those are maybe some areas that we can think about resisting. And then areas that have low refugial capacity, of course, right around the urban areas, greater impact. We might need to think about transforming, for example. And so if you go to the last slide that I'll talk about, again, the idea here is to help use this for decision making. So eventually we'll get to those vulnerabilities and we'll be able to say what you should do, but this can help us think about, what you should do specifically, but this refugial framework can help us think about where we put our activities and our focus on taking action, and then what general direction are we going in. So if you have high refugial capacity, low vulnerability, and high priority, maybe you're just going to focus on resisting. But, where you have moderate refugial capacity and moderate vulnerability, maybe we can do some things to accommodate. Maybe your vulnerability is high stand density. And so we can go in and do understory thinning. We could do prescribed burning, and some of those things could help reduce that stand density and set the forest up to accommodate more of those changes that are coming. So I think I will pass it to Sarah. Oh, and the final thing is we're taking these pieces and those are all going to go into an adaptation menu that will help people get to those really specific on the ground actions that connect to those vulnerabilities I mentioned. Take it away, Sarah.
All right, thank you. So Megan has begun to describe to you what the portfolio of science products is going to look like that comes out of the Southern Montane Forest project. I'm going to mention two others that are meant to inform planning. The first is the development of a natural range of variation study, and this is intended to pull together the best information that we have about the range of forest conditions and the fire effects that would have been on the landscape in the absence of long-term fire suppression management. We're doing this for mixed conifer and yellow pine forests that's specifically focused on Southern California. There's a similar report that focuses on California as a whole, but we're really zeroing in on these driest, warmest forests. And then the next tool that we are tapping, we didn't develop this, but we are applying it and encouraging others to apply it as well, is the Forest Service post-fire restoration framework. And this is meant to assist managers in doing enough analysis to identify priority sites for treatment and recovery after wildfire. I know that this lecture series has previously seen a lecture for the post-fire restoration framework, so I'm not going to hit it too hard, but it was developed by the Forest Service Region 5 Regional Ecology Program. And I am now part of this program, but I came on board largely after this project was developed. However, I was pulled in to run the post-fire restoration framework for the bobcat fire, and specifically for the Montane conifer portion of the bobcat fire. This was one of the 2020 fires. It was over 100,000 acres in the San Gabriel Mountains National Monument. And the fire was interesting because it burned from south to north, from low elevation all the way up and over the mountain crest, and then all the way down to the desert. Part of it was driven by a Santa Ana wind event, and it just kept going. It ended up being the second largest fire in LA County. That was behind the station fire in 2009. And the framework is organized through a series of questions. The first question is focused on distinguishing between places where the fire had beneficial effects versus problematic effects. And so that first question is up on the slide. We looked first at areas that were classified as yellow pine mixed conifer and focused on the high severity patches, and then compared the amount and the distribution of those high severity patches against the published range of natural variation. And so that's the table. NRV is in the first column, the bobcat fires in the second column. And both for high severity patch size, large patches in this fire did constitute less than 50% of the high severity area. And then in terms of frequency, we were well within NRV there as well. So generally the bobcat is falling within NRV so far. The one component of high severity fire that we have some concerns about is the overall percentage, whereas we might be looking for a range of 5 to 11% high severity fire in our conifer footprint. Instead, with the bobcat, we saw almost 30%. So this pushed us to focus on those high severity on patches where we thought the forest might be at risk of regeneration failure. Generally, conifer seeds don't disperse very far, and so tree survival and seed dispersal distances are two key factors for regeneration success. However, both of those, tree survival and seed dispersal distance, are negatively influenced as the size of the high severity patches increase. So we identified the largest patches, and we focused, based on NRV, we focused on patches that were greater than 100 acres in contiguous size. You know, they weren't perfect polygons, but they are outlined in black on this map. So we identified 6 large patches and 2 very large patches. Each of those were greater than 250 acres. And then a subsequent question in the analysis flow for the post-fire restoration framework is, where is management feasible for the restoration of desired conditions, given current and anticipated future conditions? So now I'm bringing the Forest Refugia product that Megan presented back into our talk. By overlaying that refugia layer, and I brought this to one of our ID team meetings for the Bobcat Fire Restoration Planning Group. That group of managers was able to use this layer to quickly and intuitively zero in on some of those areas where replanting might be more feasible. And that's taking into consideration likely future exposure to the climate domain, the fire domain, and the human pressure domain. The patches that I identified in the previous slide then, they fall across a range of expected change. From small expected change, those are the darker blue areas where directional change is expected to be the slowest, to larger directional changes. And those are the areas that are coded as yellow into orange. So if you focus on the patches labeled as large, large 1 in the center right of the map and large 2 are indicated to have the least predicted exposure. So looking at this layer, those might be some of the safest places for replanting. But we know that there are more factors that need to be considered when we're talking about feasibility. And so we also want to identify those areas where restoration is not going to be that feasible, logistically speaking. And so I have put in some additional information into this version of the map. The cross-hatched areas are denoted, those are wilderness areas. And then the buffer that you see is a buffer along the roads. There's a major, it's not a major highway, but it's a state highway, and it cuts across the center of the Bobcat Fire Scar. So that is the, that's Highway 2, and I have mapped a buffer of about half a mile in either direction of the road. As being about the maximum distance that really is logistically feasible for a significant planting effort. And so bringing this into consideration, we start to see that it is likely going to be possible to do restoration at the patch that is large 1. Large 2 has a couple of challenges going for it. It's quite far from the road, and it also falls partly into wilderness. We also had a discussion with the manager about Very Large 2 up at the top of the map, which also largely falls within wilderness. But sometimes it's difficult to talk about planning a replanting effort in wilderness because it means there are going to be a couple of extra hoops to jump through in terms of the review process. But having a quantitative product like this refugio map encouraged that conversation between us and the managers. And the managers were actually actively considering, maybe this would be one of those cases where it's worth it to jump through the extra regulatory hoops to be able to conduct replanting within wilderness. So we've been doing really well with rolling out this product and beginning to use it in on the ground project planning. Now within the same project, I want to switch focus a little bit now from yellow pine mixed conifer as a whole to one of our regional endemics, the big cone Douglas fir, which is a sensitive species that it's really important to managers. So this is Pseudotsuga macrocarpa, and it co-occurs with canyon live oaks. Often it's in fragmented groves. You'll find it growing in steep canyons, primarily north-facing slopes. And this is a special species because it's one of the few western conifers that can resprout along the bole and the branches after a fire. And so it's able to survive through lower intensity fire, but tree survival is more likely to be minimal after high severity burning. By my calculation, in our region, nearly 30% of acres that are classified as being dominant big cone Doug fir have burned in just the last 5 years. And so we've got a regionally endemic forest type, and it is experiencing wildfire very rapidly and largely before management activities can occur. So now jumping back to the mapping, now it's focused on mapped big cone areas. Of the large patches that we looked at earlier, 2 of them had a big cone component. Those were large 3 and large 4. And both of those patches included some high severity effects, as well as high refugial exposure. For big cone, though, we have somewhat less information about whether patch size is really the determining factor for whether big cone is able to naturally regenerate after a fire. Our knowledge is primarily about its vulnerability to high severity fire. So the final exercise that I want to do with this mapping, and I know these maps are getting busier and busier, but scan the landscape for, you're looking for high severity patches of big cone that are not in wilderness and they're close to a road. And I'm going to just zoom in a little bit. So again, crossed hatch, that's the wilderness area, and you can see the road buffer. And sure enough, we start to begin to identify some concentrations of moderate to high severity patches of big cone. Not in wilderness, close to a road. These are places that managers are willing and eager to talk about developing a potential replanting or other post-fire restoration project. So that is a case study. The post-fire restoration framework has not yet been, to my knowledge, hasn't been applied to big cone. And so this is a piece of our portfolio of work that's really specific to Southern California and applied to answer some questions that we have. Now we're towards the end of the talk, and I just want to go back to the practitioners questionnaire that we ran. We know that so far we've just been talking about planning, but we know that implementation is just as key. Survey respondents ranked their implementation challenges, and we are working to engage with the challenges as well. These aren't surprises: funding availability, regulatory compliance, changing climatic conditions. I'm going to give you just an outline of some of the implementation activities that we are beginning. So in order to support an increase in the pace and scale of forest treatments, we've been focused on developing partnerships, and that includes joining in meetings for local collaboratives. A lot of good work is done locally, as well as working through both the state and the federal agencies to try to identify at a higher level some of those opportunities for putting together a larger landscape scale project. We know that those large landscape scale projects are potentially the ones that are really competitive for going after big pots of money. And so we're working to make that happen in Southern California. One of our primary avenues has been through engaging with the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. One of the important pipelines of forest treatment funding from the state of California has been flowing through a set of block grant recipients that work with the RFFC program. And so we have, for the last 6 months or so, have been working to connect with these groups because a lot of the block grant recipients are are RCDs, resource conservation districts. And so they are really well placed to reach a broad audience, including that all lands audience that we're trying to reach out to. And so it's been a really productive fit for the Southern Montane Forests project. And this is my final slide. I think that I'll just wrap it up by underlining the fact that these Southern California montane sky islands are at high risk. When the Forest Service published its 10-year implementation plan earlier in 2022, this is the plan to confronting the wild crisis. It included mapping that clearly shows that Southern California has probably the largest concentration of fire sheds that are at high risk of destructive fire. And this fire shed mapping was generated by another Forest Service scientist, Alan Agar. And it communicates really well what we have sensed down in Southern California. But now what I'd like to leave you with is that we're really making an effort. And in fact, we're 2 years into making an effort to pull together a great suite of science products that managers will be able to use to justify strategic management actions and to pull together competitive grant proposals to enable them to implement those on the ground. And there, I think I'll take a breath. And Megan, do you have anything that you want to add on there?
I think I'll just add on to that last thought about, you can look at this map and you see the other fire sheds in California that are listed as critical fire sheds, and they share a lot of these similar stressors. And so, I really hope that there's a learning opportunity or perhaps an opportunity for framework transfer, depending on how well this works for for our region, are these tools that we develop going to be something that could be transferred elsewhere and provide a helpful framework for more strategic decision making? I don't think anybody doesn't want to be strategic, but it is exceptionally hard when you don't have all the pieces tied together. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is make it so that is easy and straightforward and at people's fingertips, so that hopefully we see more of that and more of it coming forward as, there's increasing support, both politically, legislatively, and, monetarily to get this work done.
All right. And with that, thank you so much for your attention. I think we're ready for some questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was, sounds like a very ambitious study. And yeah, you certainly gave us a sense for the scope of all the great work that you're doing. So thank you so much. Like Sarah mentioned, this is a good time for some Q&A. So please go ahead and enter any questions that you might have for them in the chat, and we'll go through them one by one. I do know that people tend to filter off during the Q&A, so I just want to now say that I'm posting a survey link in the chat right now, and if you could please fill out our survey, that would be tremendously useful to us. We use your evaluation responses as input for future webinars and to report back to our funding agencies. So it's really useful for us to hear from you. So let's go ahead with that, with questions and answers. So we have a question from Lauren Blake. When will the strategy be complete to start incorporating the recommendations and framework? So maybe just give us a sense of your timeline from now on.
Well, I can take that. We have been going for about 2 years, and we have done a significant amount of strategic development. Our current timeline is that between now and next May, we're going to be running a series of workshop engagements to pull together some of our critical audiences to continue collecting input from them. And now that we have the strategy partly drafted, it's a good time to bring the products to them and to have conversations with our key groups about what it looks like now, what changes they might see. So we're expecting the finalization process to last some months, but are hoping to be able to finalize the conservation strategy as a document, by about next May or so. Feels a little scary for me to say that, but I think we can do it.
And I'll just add on that, the plan is not to just finish the strategy and then like drop it in people's laps, but to have it be an entire process of holding some workshops, helping some people put it into action, using some case studies, using some pilot projects, so that you can really see what that looks like and understand how to use it. So there would be a greater chance of it being put into practice and being, have it operationalized across the landscape. And also do some matchmaking, I keep calling it, to help partners find each other, or maybe put together a collaborative funding proposal, those kinds of things that, again, put this into the real world.
Yeah, along those lines, I was interested, you mentioned all of the different initiatives, statewide and regional, that this is sort of responding to. Are there also land management plans or general plans for different land management agencies that are coming up, or do you know of any specific ones?
Well, I can speak to, on the Forest Service side, the Southern California Land Management Plan. The forests put it together in coordination with each other, and that is coming up due to be reevaluated. There will be an opportunity to take the current version and make some changes to it. And so this is very well timed and well positioned to to provide insights that can be funneled into that new land management plan. And that was done by design, not by chance.
And the hope is, with that as a model, perhaps then others can see how one agency perhaps was taking the strategy and putting it into their land management so that it gets, like I'm saying, operationalized, can't talk today, at multiple levels. So not just at the project level, but programmatic, and then the entire sort of land management strategy level.
Awesome. Well, that sort of addresses a question that came up about the geographic range of this work. And I'm wondering, Sarah, maybe you can just pop up the map of the study region in the meantime, for someone who missed the beginning. But this does apply to multiple jurisdictions, not just Forest Service lands.
Oh yeah, all land. So I see that question there, from private landowners all the way up to the biggest landholder of Montane Forests, which is the Forest Service, and everybody in between, public landholder, private landholder, the ancestral stewards of these lands, which are a number of tribal groups, both federally recognized and not. So we're engaging with people across the board to make sure that they are able to provide input into what goes into this strategy.
Okay, awesome.
Okay,
yeah,
so that is roughly our geographic area, but we're focused on all lands. We're not delineating it by land ownership. We're mostly interested in delineating by elevation. So we have a lower elevational boundary of approximately 1,200 meters or 3,200 feet. And we're focused on areas of montane forest extent. But that includes areas that are primarily coniferous and areas that are primarily hardwood. We know that the composition of these forests is fairly complex.
All right, thanks so much, Sarah, for popping that up. We had a question, how do you expect you'll coordinate with the SoCal high priority fire sheds?
Well, I think this is a question that's partly focused on the agency wildfire crisis strategy. And one of the ways that we are hoping to engage with it is by having a leadership team that has both internal and external partners. And so those of us who are sitting on the Forest Service side, we have those connections to opportunities to apply for some of the landscape type grant funds, depending on which initiatives and programs are currently being released. And so I think the hope is that by taking some of these pieces that we have developed on the science side and working with the forest units, that we will be able to organize some really compelling grant proposals to bring in funding and also to increase the visibility of Southern California as a cohesive area that has significant resources and really needs to be at the very top of the list for bringing what we can to bear on areas that have not yet experienced negative effects of the combination of the threats that the forests are facing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, this stuff it's tough to say how this is going to happen, but right now there's some thought about sort of block grant type kinds of things, but the fact that there are so many priority fire sheds identified in Southern California means that inevitably a whole lot of money is going to get invested in a couple of those. And this product, if you get out ahead of all this stuff, has the potential to actually be the organizing principle about how some of this stuff is actually invested. And I think that, to me, one of the more important things is to, if you look at the strategy, I don't know how many of you've read it, it's worth a read, but it's almost entirely driven by humans and human infrastructural concerns. And I think that it's really important that, a process like this can help to expand and attract a whole lot of interest outside of just simply how we protect homes that are in situ. Anyway, I just after having seen this, and I've been in calls last 2 days with Washington office Forest Service staff talking exactly about implementation of the strategy, and it seems to me that there's a real opportunity there for the strategy to be really, really important and also to benefit from this stuff. Pretty cool. I see another question.
I just wanted to add on to that, I think the critical part about what Hugh just said is that the piece about a lot of it's driven by, where people's homes are and where there's infrastructure that needs to be protected. And in Southern California, that has typically been in our chaparral. And so there's been a lot of focus on treatments that are actually ecologically damaging. And so I think it's critical at this stage that we show how important it is, how much need there is for treating these forests as opposed to the chaparral. So we're doing ecological good, we're doing ecological restoration rather than this ecological damage, because the agencies feel a lot of tension about that and they're stuck in this place. And I think having good, solid science and a strong strategy to help guide the work will be really critical for making more of the right decisions from the ecological standpoint.
Speaking of the ecological standpoint, that's a good segue into this next question about, so to address the high severity areas, are there recommended prescriptions for bringing the stand into a less vulnerable condition? And are these recommended prescriptions different from standard silvicultural prescriptions in terms of addressing climate change or other ecological criteria? So I guess getting into the weeds on management. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but it's a fair question, and we know that that's a really important set of questions. And so one of the products that we didn't talk about very much today is focused on making recommendations. It's not very prescriptive. We are pulling together with a lot of input from subject matter experts and others, a menu of recommended options. And so the intention, and this is a framework that has been developed and rolled out by others, and we're just taking it and adapting it further for our system. But the menu is going to offer a range of recommendations based on where on that gradient of resistance to accommodation to transformation, the particular piece of forest lands. It will allow different types of landowners to scroll through the menu, and if one option isn't going to work for them, then they can go deeper into the menu and find something that will work. But the entire menu is meant to provide our current best state of information about our dry and warm southern forests, and what we think could be done in them moving forward into a warmer future.
And I'd just add on, looking at the question again, is it different from standard silvicultural prescriptions? Well, a lot of those are developed at places other than Southern California. So the goal is to hopefully find out, what is the range that actually works for us to avoid the worst of the impacts, actually getting to what ideal stand densities are, at least based on literature elsewhere, is often difficult because we have no place to put this biomass. Nobody wants our trees. There's no market for this by and large. So we also have sort of a capacity problem in terms of where do you put it if you thin it. So I think those are some of the considerations that we're trying to grapple with when we're taking a feasibility focus on those recommendations that Sarah mentioned.
All right, I know we're at 3 o'clock, but I want to get to one last question. If you have a minute or two, are there any plans to see how fires will affect the watershed? So I'm guessing water quality or other resources.
I mean, I can jump on that one. There's not really a specific focus on that in our project. I mean, there is a lot of work that goes into following looking at post-fire conditions and risks. I mean, the Forest Service has a whole burned area emergency response program that is very much focused on hydrology and protecting life and property, as well as hydrologic conditions, water quality, so on and so forth. I think the goal here is that this plan will then connect to all those other pieces, and hopefully we can be more strategic. We will be incorporating some ecosystem services analyses that Hugh and colleagues led a couple of years ago that also take into account like what kind of role do these forests and the surrounding chaparral systems play in providing for water quality and quantity. That's the thing that most people in Southern California don't know, is that like this important service is that all of the water gets filtered through these forests and these native ecosystems. Even though we get most of our water from somewhere else, it's still very important.
Well, glad to see that recognition at least. Well, on that note, I just want to say thank you again to Megan and Sarah for that excellent presentation. And thank you all for attending this webinar today. So again, this will be posted online within the next few weeks, so you can watch it again or recommend it to your friends. Please join us in, let's see, I think it's 2 weeks from now. It's October 19th at noon Pacific time for another virtual lecture, this time about the connections between wildlife disease and wildfire. So kind of a different domain than our usual, so it should be fascinating as well. All right, well, hope you everyone has a good rest of their afternoon, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah and Megan. It was great. Thank you.